On the morning of March 26, 2018, a crumbled SUV was found at the bottom of a cliff along California's iconic Highway 1. The vehicle had plunged more than 100 feet into the rocks and surf below, its metal twisted, its windows shattered, and its engine still warm. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident, a family road trip gone horribly wrong. Inside the wreckage were Jennifer and Sarah Hart, a married couple known online for their bright smiles, matching outfits, and the 6 adopted children that they called their Hart tribe. Their social media pages painted a picture of joy, road trips, festivals, hugs, and inspirational captions about love conquering all. But as investigators surveyed the scene, something felt off. There were no skid marks on the road above, no sign of braking, no attempt to turn away from the cliff's edge, and the children, all of them, were missing. What began as a heartbreaking crash quickly unraveled into a far darker story. A story of image versus reality, of warning signs overlooked, of children who slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect them, and of a final, deliberate act that stunned the nation. If you enjoyed these episodes, I encourage you to follow or subscribe to Criminal Interrupted on your favourite podcast app. As I've mentioned before, I'm currently focusing on this podcast full-time due to a heart condition, so every follow and review makes a huge difference. Thank you for listening and for your incredible support. This is Criminal Interrupted. Jennifer Hart and Sarah Hart began life far from the West Coast, where their story would one day end. Both women were born in 1979 and raised in small Midwestern towns. Jennifer in Huron, South Dakota, and Sarah in Big Stone City, a tiny community on the South Dakota-Minnesota border. Some records list Ortonville, Minnesota, just across the state line, as Sarah's hometown. What is clear is that both were the eldest children in their families. Jennifer had 2 siblings and Sarah had 3. Jennifer's upbringing wasn't particularly religious, according to her father. She wasn't raised Lutheran, but she gravitated towards her faith later in college. She attended Huron High School while Sarah went to Ortonville High School in Minnesota. Their paths finally crossed at North State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Sarah had started her college journey at the University of Minnesota before transferring to NSU, and Jennifer had begun at Augustana University before transferring in 1999. Both majored in elementary education, though Sarah focused on special education. Sarah completed her degree in 2002. Jennifer, however, left the university before graduating. By then, their relationship had deepened, and in 2005, Sarah legally changed her last name to Hart to match Jennifer's, a symbolic step at a time when same-sex marriage was still not recognized in most of the United States. 4 years later, in 2009, the couple traveled to Connecticut to marry, one of the few states where same-sex marriage was legal at the time. On social media, Jennifer would later describe their early years as a couple as closeted and difficult. She wrote that when they finally came out, they lost friends. In 2004, seeking a fresh start, they moved to Alexandria, Minnesota. Both worked at a Herberger's department store, and in their new community they chose to be open about their relationship. Jennifer cycled through various jobs before becoming a stay-at-home parent in 2006, while Sarah continued working in retail management. Over the next several years, the Harts moved repeatedly, first to West Lynn, Oregon, and later to a rural area outside Woodland, Washington. Sarah eventually became a manager at a Kohl's store in Hazel Dell. By the time of the crash in 2018, the family was living in a quiet, wooded corner of southwest Washington. Financially, the Harts relied heavily on abduction subsidies from the state of Texas, where their 6 children had originally been placed in foster care. Those funds made up nearly half of the family's total income. Despite having large extended families who accepted their relationship, Jennifer and Sarah gradually distanced themselves from relatives on both sides. Jennifer became estranged from her father as early as 2001. State reports later noted that the couple often cut off contact with family members who questioned their parenting or expressed concern about the children. All 6 of the Hart children were black, adopted by 2 white women who often spoke publicly about race, social justice, and the challenges of raising children of colour. One set of the siblings had a white biological mother, but all of the children shared black African ancestry, a detail that would later raise questions about the cultural competency, racial dynamics, and whether the system had adequately protected them. Before adopting any of the children who became known as the Hart kids, Jennifer and Sarah briefly fostered a 15-year-old girl. The placement ended abruptly. Just a week before their first 3 adopted children were scheduled to arrive, the Harts dropped the teenager off at a therapy appointment and never returned. The therapist was left to tell the girl that the Harts had decided not to take her back. It was an early sign of a pattern. When things become difficult, the Harts withdraw, cut ties, or move on. Their first 3 children, Marquise, born in 1998, Hannah, born in 2002, and Abigail, born in 2003, were adopted in Colorado County, Texas. The placement began in March 2006, and by September, the adoption was finalized. 2 years later, in June 2008, the Harts adopted another sibling group from Houston, Devontae, born in 2002, Jeremiah, born in 2004, and Sierra, born in 2005. The second adoption came after a turbulent period in the children's biological family. Their mother, Sherry Davis, had lost custody in 2006 due to substance abuse issues. The children were initially placed with their paternal aunt, Priscilla Celestine, under strict conditions, including that they have no contact with their biological mother. But when Priscilla allowed Sherry to babysit during a work shift, a caseworker discovered the violation. The children were removed, and the court barred Priscilla from seeking permanent custody. Their older brother, Dante, was not adopted by the Harts due to behavioural concerns and remained in the foster system. By the time the 6 children were living together under the Hart roof, Jennifer and Sarah had crafted a very specific image of their family, one that would become central to how the public perceived them. Jennifer, the more outspoken of the two, curated their Facebook presence meticulously. The posts were filled with smiling children, matching outfits, road trips, music festivals, and inspirational captions about love, unity, and healing. The family was often photographed at events centered around social justice and LGBTQI+ pride. They were, in many ways, the embodiment of a progressive, blended adoptive family, at least online. One of the most widely circulated images of the decade came from that carefully curated world. In 2014, during a protest in Portland, following the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri, 12-year-old Devontae was photographed crying in the arms of a police officer. The moment went viral instantly. Headlines called it "The Hug Felt Round the World." Jennifer embraced the attention, sharing the image and using it to reinforce the narrative of their family as symbols of hope and healing in a divided nation. But behind the scenes, the reality was far more complicated. Child welfare reports later revealed that the children were often described as robotic or lifeless after staged photo sessions. One 2013 abuse allegation specifically mentioned Jennifer's use of Facebook, stating that the children were made to pose for pictures that projected happiness, only to return to a flat, withdrawn state once the camera was put away. The contrast between the Hart family's public image and their private reality was growing sharper, and as investigators would later discover, the warning signs had been present for years, scattered across multiple states, multiple agencies, and multiple missed opportunities. As the Hart family moved from state to state, a troubling pattern followed them, one that would later reveal just how many chances there were to intervene. The earliest documented concerns surfaced in 2008, when the family was living in Minnesota. A teacher noticed bruises on Hannah's left arm. When asked what happened, Hannah said Jennifer had hit her with a belt. Within months of that report, all 6 children were abruptly pulled out of public school for an entire year. 2 years later, in 2010, another incident emerged, this time involving Abigail. She told a teacher she had owies on her stomach and back. When pressed, she said she felt unsafe at home. She described being beaten and having her head held under cold water because Jennifer and Sarah believed she had stolen a penny. When authorities interviewed the children, they all reported being spanked frequently and deprived of food as punishment. Sarah ultimately took responsibility, pleading guilty to misdemeanor domestic assault. She was sentenced to a year of community service. But the concerns didn't end there. About a year later, Hannah told a school nurse that she hadn't eaten all day. Sarah dismissed the comment, saying Hannah was playing the food card, and suggested she be given only water. Shortly afterwards, the Harts withdrew all 6 children from public school permanently. From that point on, they were homeschooled, a decision that effectively removed the children from the eyes of mandatory reporters. In 2013, after the family had relocated to Oregon, authorities there were notified of the previous abuse allegations from Minnesota. Oregon officials launched their own investigation, interviewing each child separately, as well as neighbors, friends, and people who had interacted with the family. The accounts from friends were deeply concerning. They described rigid household rules. The children had to raise their hands before speaking, were not allowed to laugh at the dinner table, and could not even wish each other a happy birthday. Several people noted that the children appeared unusually small for their ages and were often hungry. One friend recalled an incident where Jennifer ordered a pizza for the children, but allowed each child only a tiny slice each. When she discovered the pizza was gone, she punished them by withholding breakfast and forcing them to lie in their beds for 5 hours. Another friend said the children acted scared to death of Jen, comparing them to trained robots. Yet when investigators interviewed the children themselves, they denied any new abuse and did not mention the incidents from Minnesota. Jennifer, when questioned, framed the concerns as misunderstandings rooted in prejudice, claiming that people were uncomfortable with 2 white lesbian mothers raising 6 black children. With no new disclosures from the children and no physical evidence, Oregon authorities closed the case, stating that they could not determine whether the Harts posed a safety threat. By 2017, the family had moved again, this time to a rural area outside Woodland, Washington. It was there that the most alarming events unfolded. In August of that year, at around 1:30 in the morning, 15-year-old Hannah escaped the house by jumping from her second-story bedroom window. She ran to the home of her neighbours, the DeKalbs, begging for help. According to the DeKalbs, she pleaded, quote, "Don't make me go back. They're racist and they abuse us," end quote. Moments later, Jennifer and Sarah appeared, collected Hannah, and brought her home. The next day, Jennifer tried to smooth things over, telling the neighbours that Hannah was lying, that the children were drug babies, and that Hannah's biological mother had bipolar disorder. But the DeKalbs couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Soon after, Devontae began approaching them regularly, not for conversation, but for food. He asked for bread, tortillas, anything he could get, and begged them not to tell Jennifer. Over time, he confided that the children were punished by being denied food and that physical abuse sometimes occurred. The DeKalbs reported their concerns to both local police and Washington's Department of Social and Health Services. Caseworkers attempted to contact the Harts twice, once on March 23, 2018, just 3 days before the crash, and again on March 26, the very day the family's SUV was found at the bottom of the cliff. They never made contact. By March of 2018, the Hart family was living in near total isolation on a rural property outside Woodland, Washington. The children were rarely seen. The home was quiet, and the blinds were often drawn. And behind those walls, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Washington state caseworkers had been trying to reach the family after the DeKalbs filed a formal report. On March 23rd, a social worker visited the Hart home. No one answered the door. A business card was left in the front door frame. 3 days later, on March 26th, the caseworker returned. Again, no answer. What the social worker didn't know was that by the time she knocked, the Hart family was already dead. Sometime in the early hours of March 26, Jennifer and Sarah loaded all 6 children into their GMC Yukon XL and began driving south. They crossed the Columbia River into Oregon, then continued down the coast into California. There were no signs of a family road trip. No luggage, no snacks, no plans shared with friends or co-workers. It was a silent, one-way journey. Near the tiny coastal town of Westport, California, the Yukon pulled off the road onto a gravel turnout overlooking a 100-foot cliff. What happened next was not an accident. Expert analysis of the SUV's internal computer later revealed that the vehicle started from a complete stop. The accelerator was pressed to the floor, 100% throttle, and the SUV surged forward, reaching 20 miles per hour in just 3 seconds before launching off the cliff's edge. The SUV plummeted onto the rocky beach below, landing upside down. 5 of the children, Marquise, Hannah, Jeremy, Abigail, and Sierra, were found in or near the wreckage. Devontae's body has never been recovered, but in 2019, a Superior Court judge ruled that he was in the vehicle at the time of the crash. A death certificate was issued shortly afterwards. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer the truth became. A 14-member coroner's jury unanimously ruled the case a murder-suicide. The inquest was limited to determining cause of death, not assigning criminal responsibility, but the conclusion was unmistakable. The California Highway Patrol later stated that prosecution was impossible because the only responsible parties were dead. Toxicology reports added another layer of horror. Jennifer, who was driving, had a blood alcohol level over the legal limit. Sarah and 2 of the children had significant amounts of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, in their systems. The levels suggested sedation. Investigators also uncovered chilling Google searches made on Sarah's phone in the days before the crash. She looked up, "How much Benadryl does it take to kill? Can you die from drowning in your sleep? No kill shelters for dogs." The last search was particularly haunting. The family's 2 dogs were found alive inside the Hart's home, left behind unharmed. In 2019, the Mendocino County Sheriff's Department officially closed the case and released declassified records. Among them was an incident report containing a statement from one of Sarah's co-workers. According to the report, Sarah had once confided, quote, "I wish someone had told me it was okay not to have a big family. Then she and Jennifer would not have adopted the children." End quote. It was a quiet admission, one that hinted at regret, pressure, and a dynamic inside the marriage that few outsiders ever saw. By the time the SUV hit the rocks below Highway 1, the Hart children had been reported to Child Protective Services in 3 different states. Teachers, neighbours, friends, and even strangers had raised concerns. But each time, the family moved, or the children stayed silent, or the system failed to connect the dots. The smiling photos on Facebook, the viral image of Devontae hugging a police officer, the carefully curated image of a loving, progressive family, all of it had masked a reality that was unraveling behind closed doors. The Harts had managed to avoid consequences in Minnesota and Oregon, but in Washington, the situation was closing in. Many experts believed the couple feared the children would be removed and that their carefully crafted public image would collapse. But in the end, the people who could have told the full story, the 6 children whose lives were shaped by fear, control, and deprivation, never got the chance. The Hart family tragedy is not only the story of a murder-suicide, it is the story of 6 children who spent their lives signaling for help, and a system that never managed to hear them clearly enough or act quickly enough to save them. Across Minnesota, Oregon, and Washington, teachers, neighbours, friends, and caseworkers raised concerns. Reports were filed, interviews were conducted, red flags appeared again and again: bruises, hunger, fear, isolation, and the children's own whispered pleas. Yet each time, the family slipped through the cracks by moving states, withdrawing the children from school, or presenting a polished, curated image that masks the truth. And so, as we close this story, we remember the 6 children whose lives were shaped by neglect, control, and fear, but who deserve safety, stability, and a chance to grow up. Marquise, Hannah, Devontae, Abigail, Jeremiah, Sierra. 6 names, 6 lives, 6 children who should still be here. Their story is a reminder and a warning of what happens when the systems built to protect the vulnerable are unable to see past the surface. It is a call to do better, to listen more closely, and to never assume that a smiling photograph tells the whole truth. Thank you for listening.